Hello, ladies and gentlemen. There are moments in a nation's life in which words just cannot describe the horror. Israel is at the moment right now. But as evidence and testimonies continue to flow, it is our moral obligation to tell the free world what this nation, Israel, and especially its citizens, babies who were just born, small children, women, men, and the elderly, have endured in the past week. On October 7th, 2023, at 6:30 a.m., Israel woke up to its worst nightmare. Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group based in the Gaza Strip, began a devastating and coordinated attack that shook southern and central Israel. Hamas launched a massive rocket barrage targeting civilian areas. Simultaneously, the terrorists initiated infiltration operations, breaching the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, among them Kibbutz Be'eri, Nachal Oz, Kfar Aza, and many more. This assault led to a slaughter in bright daylight of innocent victims in the Israeli side. Rabbi Israel Weiss, former army chief rabbi, one of the officials overseeing the identification of the dead, said many bodies showed signs of torture as well as rape. He and his team have seen dismembered bodies with their arms and feet chopped off, people that were beheaded and burned, among them children. A reserve warrant officer identified one of the children by her name, Avigail. Other testimonies indicated children who were tied with their hands behind their backs and were shot in the head. As to the hostages, numbers indicate more than 150 civilians, Israeli civilians, who were kidnapped to the Gaza Strip. Children were violently dragged while they were bleeding, crying out to their kidnappers to please spare their lives as they are too young. Women were mass raped and dragged in their underwear covered in blood, together with their fellow husbands and parents. In addition, also law enforcement and the Israeli Defense Forces were killed when confronting the terrorists. The consequences of this vicious and barbaric attack on Israel are ongoing. Israeli authorities are reporting over than 1,300 killed and over 3,400 wounded in the slaughter perpetrated by Hamas last weekend. Again, more than 150 hostages, 97 of them notified by Israel, identified by Israel, and we are still waiting to receive the exact numbers. A week into the war, as Israel continues to reel from the horrors of last Saturday, the IDF is reportedly completing preparations to attack Gaza to attack Gaza and remove Hamas from power. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the hardest hours Israel and the Jewish world has endured since the Holocaust. We, researchers of the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, bow our heads in the memory of the innocent victims and young souls of babies and children, of raped and murdered men, women, murdered women and murdered men, of course, and elderly, whose lives were barbarically taken just because of one reason. They were Jews. We pray for the release of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas as we speak. This is the hardest and most challenging broadcast we have ever had to shoot in the INSS, but we are here to provide answers and to keep the information flowing as truthful, reliable, and fact-based as we can. With me in the Zoom today and in the studio as well, Colonel Reserve Advocate Pnina Sharvit Baruch, Senior Researcher and Head of the Program of Law and National Security at the INSS, and Anat Shapira, Neubauer Research Associate at the Terrorism and Low-Intensity Conflict Program at the INSS and PhD candidate in Philosophy Department of Tel Aviv University. Hello to the both of you, Pnina and Anat. Thank you very much for joining me in this very hard hour. Pnina, I'd like to start with you. This is very hard, but we will try to explain specifically about the crimes of Hamas. What do we know until now What has happened? And later we can go more into details, please.
Well, you gave the description, and this is a description that is reliable. It's based on many people who saw what was done, many videos taken by the Hamas people. By the way, one additional element was that they took footage of the barbaric things that they were done on the phones of the victims and sent it to the families of the victims. This is a level of cruelty that is really, I think, is worse than Al-Qaeda, is ISIS kind of cruelty. We heard these stories done to the Yazidi women, and we see it here by an element that is so-called fighting for the freedom of Palestine, but now we understand clearly that they are not interested in the freedom of Palestine. They are interested in the destruction of the state of Israel, and on the way destroying and killing and murdering civilians in Israel. So this is really the most barbaric actions that you can imagine. And we saw it. I saw it in my own eyes. Some of the footage, you can't take those pictures afterwards out of your mind. And I think, well, clearly, these are also crimes under international law. It's war crimes because we are in an ongoing armed conflict with the Hamas. And the Hamas, beyond being a terror organization, also is the de facto government of the Gaza Strip and has a military force. We didn't know how strong and sophisticated it is. Now it is clear. These are also crimes against humanity. They were done with under the definition of crimes against humanity. And I'll quote just so we understand what we're talking about. It's crimes that are conducted as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against a civilian population. And this is exactly there. And you have the torture, the sexual violence, the persecution, the murder, of course, the enforced disappearance, everything. These are all elements and kinds of crimes against humanity. It also enters into the definition of genocide. Genocide doesn't have to be successful in eliminating a people, an attempt in a certain area. It also applies to them. So clearly these are the worst crimes you can imagine. And the Hamas has proven that they are a bunch of barbaric war criminals, terror organization, and by also invading Israel, uprooting 22 villages. They killed soldiers, by the way, and attacked military infrastructure in order to get to the civilians. It's like the opposite of of the logic of the conflict. The military was the collateral damage. Also, of course, they killed soldiers and abducted soldiers, but that was in order to get to the civilians and to do what they did to the civilians. So clearly, these are the worst crimes, and that clearly shows that Israel cannot live with this kind of barbaric terror organization controlling an area that is meters from its border. All these places that were targeted are inside the state of Israel. They have been there from the creation of the state of Israel even beforehand. This is also not that it would make a change with the barbaric, but these are not settlements, because we heard also that. And we are already starting to hear the Hamas saying that these things didn't happen, and some people buying this explanation, which reminds me of Holocaust denial in real time, when we have the footage proving otherwise. So I think...
back in the Holocaust, we didn't have the footage that we have now.
Now we have the footage taken by the Hamas and evidence of people that we've seen these things in their own eyes, and still we see this denial. We see people around the world accepting this denial. And just to conclude, this is not a group that is meant to free Palestine and to treat the Hamas as aiming its actions to free Palestine. It's like treating Al-Qaeda as trying to free Afghanistan. Yes, this is a terror organization, and if the world doesn't take a strong stand in terrorism when it is against us, the Jewish people, they will be next, and also they will lose in my view, their moral standing in general.
Thank you very much, Pnina. We're just about also to talk about the implications worldwide, because we witnessed the local event, but clearly there are waves to this event and implications not only to Jews worldwide and Israelis, but to the free world. itself. So we will talk about it as we turn now to Anat Shapira. Thank you for joining us. Anat, what can you tell us about the plan? The plan of Hamas? We know that this was a very planned and advanced operation. What is known until now?
So as Pnina was pointing out, despite attempts, for example, by the second in command in Hamas, Salah al-Arouri, to deny the murderous and atrocious intentions of the operation, documents that were found on terrorists enter Israel show that all of this was planned. They were planning to target schools. They had maps of the settlements to which they invaded, where they specifically pointed out where schools are located, where youth centers are located, where clinics are located, and that was part of the intention. Documents further revealed that they had code words for example, hostages, for looting and arsoning institutions and buildings and things like that.
And also indicating specifically the murder of civilians. This was a core goal of this operation, correct?
Exactly. So the general idea, as Pnina already pointed out, was that they've tried to prevent the military's ability to defend the civilians, but the chief target of this invasion was civilian communities in the area surrounding the Gaza Strip. They specifically targeted women, children. They intended to kidnap citizens into the Gaza Strip to use them as bargaining chip. They intended to kill people. And despite the attempt to argue that this was done by mere few people who are not members of Hamas, we have very clear proof of that. It is also worth pointing out, by the way, that Hamas also today is continuing to commit such crimes towards Gazan people. We know that Israel has allowed the citizens of Gaza to evacuate. However, we know that Hamas is preventing them from doing that in the hope of using them as human shield, much like it intended to use Israeli hostages as human shield. So this is all a deliberate policy of a terrorist organization who sees nothing short but achieving its murderous aims.
How long have they been planning this, as far as we know?
So obviously, we don't fully know. There are indications that already from 2014, there were plans for at least parts of this. Documents that were revealed yesterday show that at least from October 2022, we also know that Hamas has done several drills in training for these processes. And it is important to acknowledge, it's not that these drills were unknown to Israel. On, I think it was September 12th, for example, there was a coordinated training exercise to Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip, which we were aware of. It's just that Israel was under the assumption that Hamas wants a better life for Gazan people, which is a joint goal for both Israel and what we thought at the time. Unfortunately, this is not the objective of Hamas. Hamas, as Pnina said, does not want to free Palestine. It does not want to ensure good life for the citizens of Gaza.
What was the goal? What was the main goal? What did they want to achieve?
It is very hard to answer that, because in order to answer this question, you would have to get in the minds of Hamas leaders, which, as we already acknowledged, are not necessarily.
Because there were clear signs of the will to occupy the Israeli side, to occupy the villages.
So it is clear that Hamas thought that Israel is at a point of weakness, and to some extent it did manage to surprise us, and it did manage to gain the upper hand for a very short time. Thankfully, we have our army and our security forces, and this is no longer the situation. But I don't think that they thought that they would win the overall war. This is why I think that we need to stop thinking
They were surprised from their own success, in a way. Is it?
Yes, I agree. I think they've achieved more than they've bargained for to begin with. And I think that's part of why they're now in such a complicated situation. I think that to an extent, they wanted to change the balance of power. They wanted to have a demonstration of force. But we also need to stop thinking about it in rational terms, in the way that we tend to think about things, and start thinking about it as an organization.
Western way, in Western terms, yes.
Yes.
It's like asking what was the aim of ISIS in murdering so many people, in beheading, it's a religious, we didn't think that Hamas was ISIS. We didn't think. That was our misconception. We thought that we have there a fierce enemy, a terror organization, but that they are human beings. And no, it's ISIS. It's cruelty at the sheerest And the idea is at all expenses to hurt and kill and murder Israelis, even if it means that Palestinians, the poor Palestinians on the Gaza Strip will also get killed. That's a worthy price to pay because they don't value human life.
Yes, exactly. Pnina, what can you tell us about the reaction so far of the international community to what we have witnessed here in the past week? The international community, the West is still with Israel, but there are tendencies already towards the opposite.
Yeah.
So how do you see it?
I think when we see the leadership of most Western countries is on the side of Israel. President Biden gave a moving speech, very important for all Israelis, and it really had an impact to make us feel a little bit better in this terrible situation that we have this good friend behind us, others to the UK Prime Minister, many leaders in Germany, the European Parliament. So we have a lot of support from friends around the world. I think especially those leaders that are also that see the intelligence, that saw the pictures, that saw the footage, and understood what we see. When it comes to
that some of the hostages are also citizens
and some
of
the
those
hostages
nations.
you have Americans and Germans and others, and of course from Thailand, quite a lot of workers. I think when it comes to the media, we saw in the beginning some sympathy to Israel, but now again it's all starting to be this very balancing act. And we will talk just now about what's happening in Gaza, and I'm not saying life is very difficult at the moment in Gaza and they are suffering, but still there's a difference, this kind of balancing act. We didn't see it after 9/11 when the US went after Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, at least not in the beginning. And here you have it from the beginning. And when it comes to the UN, again, I'm one of those I'm one of those in Israel trying to explain to Israeli leaders and to people that can hear that the UN is relevant and we have to take them seriously and it's an important body. And today I say, shmum, the UN's reaction is disgusting. Really, UN women published this statement that focuses mainly on the hardship in Gaza with one sentence about the fact that the civilians were killed on both sides, nothing about all the terrible sexual violence that was carried out against women. Pregnant women, they cut up their bellies and took out the babies and murdered them. Okay, women that were mass raped.
Let's focus now on really the gender.
So I'm saying, and where is the UN? Either condemning Israel with a short reference to the fact that the civilians were killed also on the Israeli side. Really, you can see that they are completely hostages of the most extreme Palestinian voices, because I think that the moderate Palestinians are also appalled by what happened.
We have to add here that women and young girls are a special group when it comes to a special victim group in situations of war, if it's mass rape, if it's violation of the body, if it's, as you said, tearing their bellies apart and taking out a fetus. I can't believe I'm saying these words out of my mouth, but I think the world must hear this. Where are we going from here, Pnina? What is expected from the Israeli reaction?
Well, I think Israel understood in the hard way that the idea that we can live side by side, the Gaza Strip controlled by the Hamas, and people maybe don't understand, we are talking about meters between the border of Gaza and civilian communities that are now all destroyed. That the idea that we can live side by side and by improving the economic situation, they're talking about the siege on Gaza. We've opened, there's produce going in there. There were workers from Gaza coming to work in Israel. The idea was to try to improve the economic situation and to give the Hamas an incentive to keep out of the violence, of the cycle of violence. Now we understand that this was completely a misconception, and we cannot ensure the security of our civilians and Israel's security within our borders, as if the Hamas continues to control the Gaza Strip. They in essence have also this is also against our sovereignty, our territorial integrity. They conquered parts of Israel, so we really have to get rid of all the Hamas, at least of all its military capabilities, make it very weak, hoping that other forces, more moderate forces, will take control over Gaza. It will also be better for the Gazan people because the Hamas is also very cruel to its own. And this means that we have to use force. There's no other way to uproot a terrorist organization. You can't negotiate with them. And the force, unfortunately, entails a lot of devastation in Gaza because the Hamas entrenched all its military capabilities within civilian localities, under the civilian buildings, tunnels, within houses and mosques and hospitals. Everything was used for their military purposes. So Israel, in order to eliminate the military capabilities of the Hamas, has to target what looks like civilian buildings, although it is under the international law a military objective, a legitimate military objective, a military target under international law. And Israel, we do respect the law, even when things like this are happening to us. And according to international to the laws of armed conflict, a military target includes also a civilian object that is used by the enemy for its military purposes. So what we are attacking are military objectives. And then you have the principle of proportionality. When you attack a military objective, you have to balance between the military advantage from the attack and anticipated from the attack and the collateral damage to civilians and civilian objects anticipated from the attack. If that damage to civilians is excessive in comparison to the military advantage, then the attack is not proportionate and not legal. What is happening now is that the military advantage from the attack is huge because we understand that Hamas is an existential threat. And we have such, it's not even the US after 9/11 fighting in Afghanistan again. This is just 5 meters from our houses, 10, 20 meters. So the military advantage is huge. And when the military advantage is huge, it means that even if the collateral damage, the unfortunate, tragic collateral damage to civilians is also very big, it still is not excessive. And that means that it is still proportionate and lawful.
This is clear. And I would add to this that even the IDF gave the people in Gaza also the opportunity to escape.
Yes.
South. I mean,
yes,
even
also...
in spite of all, the IDF even gave them this opportunity. I mean, this has to be
it's also illegal. It's also a legal
right.
requirement to take precautions, precautions to minimize harm to civilians as much as possible. Precautions doesn't mean that you have to give specific warnings before attacking every building. Israel did that in the past, but that it went beyond what the law requires. Now, Israel is giving warnings, enabling the civilians to leave, opening humanitarian corridors, stopping attacks while these humanitarian corridors are opened. And then the Hamas, of course, fires rockets at those times against Israeli civilians. But we want the civilians to be spared as much as possible. But the Hamas, and I think Anat already said something about that, is actually preventing the civilians from leaving the area, maybe even targeting. There's a case that was a claim that there was an attack against civilians leaving the area, and we still are trying to find out the facts, but it would be probably the Hamas doing that because they want to persuade the civilians that it's dangerous for them to leave the area. So they are doing everything to leave the civilians. They want as many civilian casualties on their side too, because again, the civilians are just a pawn, lives are a pawn in fighting this time the international campaign against Israel.
Yeah, clear. Thank you, Pnina. As if this is not enough, all these atrocities, we also have another front. We have the Northern Front. And maybe, Anat, you can clarify for our audience, what is the situation going on right now in the Northern Front of Israel? What has Hezbollah done until now? How does Hezbollah see what is happening in south of Israel? What is expected of Nasrallah to react? What is your view on these matters?
Okay, so the first thing we need to acknowledge is that the threat from the north is not limited only to Hezbollah. There are also Palestinian organizations in Lebanon, and one of the ways for Hezbollah to contribute to the current conflict is by giving freedom of action to the Palestinian organizations in Lebanon. So, for example, we've seen rocket launches from Lebanon towards Israel. We've seen several infiltration attempts, all of them successfully foiled by the IDF, but nonetheless, attempts happen all the time in the hope of recreating their unfortunate success in the southern border from Lebanon. So the first thing we need to understand is that even if Hezbollah does not engage itself in the war, it does give freedom of action to Palestinian organizations operating from Lebanon. Key question from Israel is, will Hezbollah decide to intervene in the conflict and launch its full-scale abilities? Currently, it seems that they have not yet decided to do so. Hezbollah, unfortunately, is even more powerful than Hamas, both in terms of the rocket arsenal and missiles arsenals that it has.
Capabilities of Hezbollah are.
But also in terms of
7 times bigger. Yeah.
Commando units that it has, which have been better trained than those of Hamas, which have had the experience of fighting in the Syrian civil war and have acquired combat experience, both from Iranian instructors and also fought alongside the Russian army, making them far more capable. At this point, those capabilities have not yet come to expression, but we are walking on a very, very narrow tightrope here, where right now it seems as though Hezbollah is still trying to maintain what we call the equations. So they retaliate in response to Israeli actions, and they try to make the retaliations measure to Israeli actions. And Israel, in exchange, tries also to measure its responses to events happening in the north. However, this is a very, very fragile balance. There could be very easily spillages over from, for example, a missile that accidentally hits civilian population either in Israel or in Lebanon and causes a large number of casualties, would force either side to respond, thus extending the conflict, making it wider and therefore far, far riskier.
Anat, how much is the Hezbollah's reaction dependent on what the IDF will do in the Gaza Strip? What do you think?
So I think there are two different aspects to this. I think one has to do with what we call the local axis of evil led by Iran, and the fact that we already know that Iran has at the very least consulted and aided Hamas in executing their operation, even if not fully being involved in the final stages. The planning, the training, some of the supplies were all clearly provided by Iran. So one thing is to say, if Iran decides to exert pressure on Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah is not a puppet in the hands of Iran, Iran does have a lot of influence of Hezbollah. The other aspect we need to take into account is that Hezbollah will assess its chances of succeeding in the conflict. The more the IDF is engaged in Gaza, the less power and concentration and focus the IDF is able to dedicate to the northern front, the more Hezbollah is likely to assess that its chances of succeeding are higher, thus making it more likely that they will intervene. So we need to take both these considerations into
even
account.
though the United States has clearly has clearly showed that it's standing on the side of Israel and will operate if needed.
So the United States has clearly expressed its support in sending the Sixth Fleet into Israel, the Fifth Fleet into Israel, in the expressions from Biden. However, they've also said things like, we won't have boots on the ground. So it's very hard to assess what exactly the United States will do. And that is a consideration that needs to be taken into account alongside other considerations. But that does place, and you started by saying that the local conflict in a more wider perspective of the overall global conflict that is taking place right now in the world, and the question of the United States and the West, rational liberal forces against their enemies.
Thank you for this. Our time is almost up, but I would like to ask both of you a final question, maybe about the most important issue, the resilience of the Israeli society. What does it mean to be resilient in these times? Anat and Pnina, from your views, how would you assess the situation of the society inside of Israel right now? Maybe Anat, and then Pnina will conclude.
I think we've seen some amazing things over the past week. I think the overall recruitment of everyone in Israel, I think I saw a number today of like hundreds of thousands of Israelis coming back from abroad in order to join the reserves. We've seen donations of equipment, of food, of everything. We've seen people offering to house those being evacuated from both the north and the south. And I think this is what it means. We, as Israelis and as Jewish people, ultimately, despite all of what you said about the United States support, can mostly trust on each other. And one thing that we do is that when we need each other, we come out to help. It doesn't matter how divided we were 10 days ago. It doesn't matter
And
that
we were, and we very much were. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We are now united, and we are now supporting one another in every possible way that we can.
Thank you, Anat. Pnina, final words.
I want to say something about the idea of what will be with the peace in the region and the Palestinian issue. And I think one thing that also needs to be understood, the Gaza Strip was not occupied by Israel. Israel disengaged from the Gaza Strip in 2005. The idea was, I was there involved in seeing that the greenhouses are transferred so they can continue to operate them. The Hamas took control in 2007, throwing the Fatah people out of the window, literally. And since then decided to choose not to develop this area for the benefit of its residents, but to make it into a stronghold of using all the money that it necessitated it got to have more weapons and more capabilities in order to fight and Israel and try to destroy it. And today, I think another thing that maybe also most of the people that were killed, most of the localities on the border of Gaza that were the targets of the attack, these were the ones that were searching peace, that were helping the Gazans come into hospitals in Israel, that were trying to organize events with the children in Gaza. These were those believing in peace and wishing for a peaceful coexistence. And I think what we saw with murderous, barbaric attack is also another big blow to the idea that we can ever have a peaceful resolution of the conflict with the Palestinians, and this is another victim of this cruel attack.
Pnina, Anat, I think the three of us never in our wildest dreams imagined that we will have a talk about what we talked about in the last hour. I want to thank you very much, and for the staff of the INSS, for this broadcast that is probably the most important broadcast we've ever had to shoot. And for our audience, please stay tuned. We will try to have more programs for you to clarify, to give more information, truth-based information, which you cannot find, unfortunately, on social media today, but you will find it in the INSS. I want to thank you very much again, and thank you for our audience, and let's hope for better days. Thank you. Goodbye.